Hi, I'm Mulindana Machia, the current editor of Headspace, and I've decided that today we need to discuss a topic that most people experience, most people deal with, and as time goes on, you'll be seeing more of me discussing topics that have been brought to my attention by people who've been reaching out, trying to further the discussion that Headspace is bringing about. But for today, what we're going to talk about is coping. Now, the way I like explaining things is in two ways: the hard scientific way and the personalized way. So, to be scientific, or at least bring some facts into the idea of coping, what coping is you trying to find a way to deal with the emotions that come about from a stressful situation, i.e., too much work, something going wrong, the loss of a loved one, even something like, let's say, just getting out of a relationship. Those can all be stressful situations, and we all cope differently. Now, the way coping works is it's categorized in two forms. There's what's called adaptive coping and maladaptive coping. Adaptive coping is the way to cope with things in a healthy manner, and maladaptive coping is a way to cope with things in an unhealthy manner, which may lead to an increase in physical or mental health issues. Now that I've given you some idea of what I mean by coping, I need to speak on things in a more personalized way so that I can make you understand exactly what I mean. All of us experience situations where we're not comfortable with, situations that we're not happy with. A good deal of my friends have social anxiety. They don't like being in extremely social situations because they feel extremely stressed by them. Now, the thing is, what most people don't realize is that our ways of coping can determine how we move forward in terms of our own mental health. How we deal with situations can determine how we move forward. Let me give an example of myself. I never had the best coping mechanisms. I'm glad that I've started to develop better ones as time has gone on. What I usually do when I'm stressed is I draw, or ironically, I edit, or I talk. I try to be productive or positive, and then I get to dealing with the problem, which I will make sure I speak more on about at near the end of this video. What most of us don't realize is that our coping mechanisms are negative and they're affecting us negatively. We are taking them in because they are an easy way to get out of our problems, not realizing that they expand on our problems, they expand on the issues we have to face. Let me give an example. Let's say you get home from a stressful day of school if you're a student, or work if you're working, and you find that it's in a mess. Maybe your roommate has left it in a mess. Maybe if you do have kids, your kids have left it in a mess. A proper way to deal with the stress of that situation is maybe going on a walk to calm yourself down, taking some time to pray or to meditate or to settle yourself before coming to deal with what's going on. An unhealthy way to deal with it is probably to drown your sorrows in some substance. Most people don't realize that the negative coping mechanisms we build up over time exacerbate, increase the problems that we face. Honestly speaking, all of us cope. It is normal, it is human to cope. There is nothing wrong with the idea of wanting to relieve yourself of stress. But the problem is, the more we use these negative coping mechanisms, the more damage we tend to do on ourselves. And once that damage gets too far, we might end up breaking ourselves, and picking up the shards that are left over is even more painful than the idea of facing the problems that we have. I'm not the most amazing person to cope in situations. There's this thing that I termed emotional vampirism, which is, in my opinion, one of my worst ways of coping. I would depend on people to make me happy. I would use them as a validation tool. I would work my head off trying to make sure that other people are happy, because then I could leech off that happiness. I ended up pleasing people, becoming severely dependent, unable to actually talk, all in an attempt to get out of what I personally called the darkness, or the darkness that I was feeling, or the stress or the strain that I was feeling. Coping mechanisms as a whole are not designed so that we can damage ourselves more. Now, there are a lot of maladaptive coping mechanisms. For example, substance abuse, or promiscuous behavior such that it is used to make yourself feel better about your situation, or excessive sleeping. These are just a few examples of ways people maladaptively cope to situations. We want to remove ourselves from those situations, want to feel like we're not in a stressful situation so that we can feel better about it, feel relieved from the tension that exists. But the truth of the matter is, the problem hasn't disappeared. It hasn't gone away, it still exists. And in all honesty, there's hundreds of other ways to cope with things. Personally, I've started to try taking on exercise as a way to keep myself focused and centered, prayer as a way to keep myself focused and centered. I've tried to talk more, and that's important. That is specifically important. Venting and talking about what's going on, that is extraordinarily important. Now, here's the danger, the biggest danger that comes from these negative coping mechanisms. They make things worse. Substance abuse can lead to a plethora of mental health issues. Avoiding situations feeds your anxiety. It builds on it. And as you go on, you find that these maladaptive coping mechanisms tend to create even worse disorders from them. If you're constantly avoiding social situations, your brain will feed into the idea that social situations are worth being anxious about, and so it deepens the anxiety that you feel in order to protect yourself. It's like an abuse of the flight or fight mechanism we have when we're afraid. It's human to cope. I'll reiterate this. I'll repeat this excessively because it's important to remember that it is very human to cope. No one will put it against you if you need time to process the situation, to deal with the situation, to harbor and work with the emotions that are coming with the situation. The things that usually go wrong are how we cope. Now, one of the reasons why I suggested Headspace was because I wanted to bring forward an idea of not judging people from the stance that they've been at, not putting them down for the mistakes they've made or the fears they have, because one of the biggest issues with this whole mental health conversation is that we stigmatize the people who are experiencing these things. And we don't want that. Agita doesn't want that. The Headspace project isn't about that. What we're about is positive and honest growth. So the idea that the way you've coped has made you worse means that you're unfixable isn't one that I want to bring about. There's no such thing as unfixable. There's no such thing as you need fixing. You're a human being who's experiencing things, who's gone through things, who needs to be able to come forward with what they've gone through. All of this ideal that somebody needs to be fixed, or somebody needs to be taken care of, or somebody is less than human, doesn't make sense in my mind, and it shouldn't make sense in your mind. We need to be able to come forward with the things that we've experienced. I've experienced depression, I've experienced anxiety, I've experienced this, and this is how I've coped, and this way might not have been the best way, so what's a better way to do it? What's a better way to handle it? What's a better way to come forward with it? That's what I want Headspace to be about, and that's what I'm hoping to be about, an open discussion to bring forward new ideas on how to be able to express the things that we've been going through. Like I said earlier, I haven't coped with things the best way before in my life, and maybe that's why I feel that this needs to be discussed even before I enter some of the more heavy topics that have been brought forward and brought to my attention. It's because one way or another, no matter what you're going through, you will have to cope with it, and how you cope with it might make it worse or might make it better, might create a positive response or a negative response. Honestly, maybe I have said something that you've done. Maybe you feel bad about it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want to be better. The conversation is completely open. It is one where there shall not and should not be stigmatism at all. Like I said, everybody copes. Everybody is human. Everybody needs to deal with things. How we deal with them really determines things. Now, this is something I need to mention beforehand. Any coping mechanism, whether it's adaptive meaning good or maladaptive meaning bad, can still not solve the problem. The way you cope is just so that you can be calm enough to handle the problem. Coping is not a solution. The same way being handed a diagnosis is not taking the medication. There is a massive difference between coping with the situation and solving the problem that exists in the situation. And those two should not be mistaken for each other. Because no matter how you cope, it can also become an addiction. You can become settled in that way of dealing with things, and it might not end up being healthy, no matter how positive it is. Even if, let's say, you exercise or you take things calmly, if it means that you are not actually getting to the root of the problem, then you have generated a whole new problem. It is advised to take adaptive coping mechanisms towards bad situations so that you are calm enough, steady enough, and mentally aware enough to solve the problem. That is why adaptive coping mechanisms are advised. They are not the solution. We need to be able to willingly talk through our issues, our problems, the things that we're going through, no matter how severe we think they are, no matter how much we think that they're burdening us, because the idea that we can't talk about this is a negative one. The idea that we can't say that we have experienced depression or sadness or anything that is against our own mental health is a destructive one. We're always told to watch out for our physical health, especially in this time. We're always told to be aware of how we are physically. Why aren't we told to be aware of how we are mentally? So, I want people to discuss how they've coped, why they've used that method of coping. Personally, like I said earlier, and I've repeated and I will still emphasize because I need to make sure that you understand that I am not just preaching without experience. I haven't coped with things the best way, and it ruined my perspective of the world. It broke me down and left me in a shattered husk of the person that I thought I was and the person that I felt I should be, all in an intense effort to try and escape the problems that I was experiencing. All that running, all that escaping didn't solve anything. It just piled the problems on and left me too anxious, too unstable, too unwilling to deal with anything. Now, to re-emphasize healthy ways to cope: journaling, writing, exercising, walking. There is a number of positive ways to cope, and I think the one that I would advise the most is talking. Even if it's just a little a day, even if it's just a minute amount every day, being able to talk about your problems just slightly eases the burden. Step by step, bit by bit, we want to get to a point where everybody can fully and openly discuss this. And I need to re-emphasize this. Coping doesn't actually solve the problem. If, let's say, you journal to get things out of your head, you need to be able to use that to find a solution to keep yourself calm. Let's say you pray more often, the way I've been doing. You commune with God more often, or you talk about your issues more often. The idea of doing these positive steps to cope is to eventually get you to the point where you can solve the issue that you're experiencing. We're in this together. We all experience it. We're all human. None of us should feel segregated or stigmatized for the way we've taken up on coping with our issues. Because we're all human. We all do things in the capacity that we are human. All trying to be better, all striving to do more with ourselves. So whether you've been on a streak of maladaptive coping mechanisms, and I should mention this, there's something called maladaptive daydreaming, which is also a bad coping mechanism, trying to live your ideal reality in your mind. It creates dissociation from what's actually going on and makes it harder to solve your problems. Most people don't think of daydreaming as something which could be a negative coping mechanism, but it can be. And I think I should mention that because most people just brush that under the rug. But anyway, back to what I was saying, back to the main point. However you have coped, however you are trying to cope, you have the ability to do better. That's the best part about being human. We have the chance to try and be better. No matter how far along you feel, no matter how rejected or alone you feel, there are always people willing to be there. Personally, I am. It's the whole reason why I suggested this. It's the whole reason why I edit this. It's the whole reason why I try to talk about this. Because we have the chance to do more with ourselves. We have the chance to be better. So, like I said, I wanted to discuss coping before I went into some of the heavier things that have been brought to my attention, because whatever you are going through, you do have to cope with it. And the way you cope might determine how much along the line of getting better you do get. So I want everybody to be aware that whatever has happened, however it has happened, there is no stigmatism with the Headspace project. There's no degradation with the Headspace project. There's no alienation. Everybody should be willingly able to talk about this. Everybody should come together and think to themselves, how can we cope better with our situations? And even after we've coped, how can we solve our situations? Anyway, I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that it has actually touched somebody and helped them think through how they've been working and how they've been doing things, help them look for help. Because that's the whole aim of this project, to get an open conversation about this. So thank you, and I hope you guys have taken something from this.